I need to talk to you directly about something truly important, something they never told you, and I want to be completely clear. You've always been led to believe that January 1st is the day, the moment of celebration and new beginnings. The entire world celebrates it as the start of the new year. But I have to tell you a profound spiritual truth that changes everything. January 1st is just the celebration, but January 6th is where your spiritual year actually begins. Think about that. They told you, they encouraged you to make your resolutions on January 1st, to set your goals as the clock strikes midnight. But they never ever explained to you that the real spiritual gateway, the door to the entire coming year, opens on January 6th. That omission is not accidental. My name is Okono Shidimina. I come from Lagos, Nigeria, and for 20 years of my life I walked a very different path. I was a witch for 2 full decades. I have operated in the spiritual realms with that knowledge, and I knew with absolute certainty that the period from January 6th to the 12th is the most spiritually active, the most potent week of the entire year. Isn't a metaphor or a gentle suggestion, it is a functional reality in the spirit world. And I feel a deep urgency for you to know something that might shock you, that might rearrange your understanding of how your year unfolds. These specific 7 days form a unique spiritual window, a gateway that swings open only once per year. It is a divine timetable. What you do or what you fail to do in this period carries extraordinary weight. The spiritual atmosphere you consciously or unconsciously create during this narrow gateway will attach itself to you and follow you relentlessly for the next 12 months. It sets the tone. It establishes the spiritual weather system for your entire year. I am not speaking from theory. I am speaking from 20 years of practiced intentional activity on the other side of this truth. For 20 years, I planted demons. I assigned spirits. During that exact January 6th to 12th window, knowing with the cold precision of a strategist that their assignment, their influence would not fade or weaken, but would persist with full force until the very last day of the year, December 31st. I did this as my work. Tonight, I stand before you to expose the mechanics of this. I want to pull back the curtain so you can see clearly. I will explain in simple terms why January 6th to the 12th is this unparalleled spiritual gateway. I will describe what happens to your life, to your finances, your health, your relationships if you miss this critical window. And most importantly, I want you to understand why this very moment today, as you listen, is your powerful opportunity to set your year right, to redirect its course. The reason for this urgency, straightforward and immediate, we are in that gateway right now. This is not a future event or a past memory. As I speak these words and as you hear them, we are positioned inside that active, open spiritual window. To give you context, to help you understand the depth of this, I must tell you about my past. Before I encountered Jesus Christ, before my life was transformed, I served in a very specific division within the Satanic kingdom. My department was the annual Gateway Division. Our entire purpose, our singular assignment was to exploit, to manipulate, to dominate that January 6th to 12th spiritual window. Our goal was to set negative, heavy, oppressive atmospheres over individuals, families, even regions, atmospheres that were designed to last and exert their influence for the entire calendar year. We were strategic. We were timed. We were coordinated. I was initiated into this work at the age of 26, right there in Lagos, and my guide was my own aunt, a woman who specialized specifically in this field of gateway manipulation. She was my teacher. She laid bare the reality for me. She taught me that humans, in their celebration and tradition, focus entirely on January 1st. They think the new year has begun in every dimension. But spiritually, she said, nothing is set yet. The spiritual ledger for the year is still blank. The real gateway, the moment when the spiritual realm opens for the year's business, opens on January 6th. She drilled this into me. Whatever we plant during those 7 days, whether it is a seed of blessing or a seed of curse, will grow and manifest for the full 12 months. It is the most fertile spiritual planting season. And then she gave the command that defined my work for years: attack them. use their ignorance of this window, use their preoccupation with the physical celebration to establish spiritual strongholds. That was my mission. And now, having left that darkness, my mission is to bring this truth to light so that you are no longer ignorant, so that you can step into this gateway not as a victim, but as one who is armed with knowledge and ready to establish a year of victory. This is the foundation of everything I will share with you. So let's begin with the first and perhaps most fundamental reason why this January 6th to 12th gateway is so critically important. It is because this is the precise ordained time when spiritual atmospheres are established for the entire year that is to come. I want you to really understand what an atmosphere is in the spiritual sense. It's not something you can see with your physical eyes. You can't touch it, but I promise you it determines everything that happens in your life. It is the pervasive spiritual climate that surrounds you. It can be an atmosphere of breakthrough or conversely, an atmosphere of constant struggle. It can be a thick, tangible atmosphere of divine favor, where things just seem to work in your favor, or it can be a heavy, oppressive atmosphere of opposition, where you feel like you're pushing against a wall in everything you attempt. The spiritual principle is this: whatever atmosphere is allowed to dominate, to be set in place during those key days from January 6th to the 12th, that very atmosphere will go on to dominate your experience for the entire year. It becomes the background against which every event, every opportunity, every challenge will play out. The events of your life will flow according to the spiritual weather that was set during that week. I witnessed this principle in action over and over again, and I want to share a specific example with you so you can see how practical and real this is. There was a businessman who lived in Abuja, and his name was Brother Eka. He was like many people, eager, hopeful, ready for a new start when the new year came around. In 2015, he started his year with excitement. On January 1st, he sat down, made his goals, wrote out his plans. On January 2nd, he offered a brief prayer asking for God's blessing on his year. Then life resumed its normal rhythm. January 6th arrived, and for him, it was just another day. He went back to his work, to his routines as usual. He had no awareness, no knowledge that a spiritual gateway had opened. He did not know that the spiritual realm was in a state of heightened activity and establishment. At that very time, I was given an assignment concerning him. I was assigned specifically to set an atmosphere of financial leakage over his business during that exact January 6th to 12th period. My task was clear. For those 7 days, I focused on sending spirits of confusion, of poor decision-making, and of missed opportunities into his sphere. I worked to create a spiritual environment around his business dealings that would cause prosperity to slip away. Now, from Brother Eka's perspective, nothing dramatically bad happened during that particular week. There was no sudden catastrophe, no obvious sign. He went about his business, and the week passed like any other. But the change became evident from January 13th onward. That is when the atmosphere we had established began to manifest in the natural realm. Everything he touched began to leak financially. It was a slow, steady drain. Contracts would be signed with great promise, but then they would never execute properly. They would fall apart in the details. Money would come into his business, but it would disappear just as quickly through unexpected expenses, bad deals, or mysterious errors. Opportunities that seemed solid and real would appear before him, but as soon as he reached for them, they would evaporate into thin air. There was no single huge disaster, but a constant frustrating trickle of loss and missed potential. By the time June came around, his business was seriously struggling, and by December of that same year, he was nearly bankrupt. The entire year had been a story of gradual decline. Later, during a deliverance session he attended, the prophet ministering to him asked a very pointed question. "Brother, what happened in your life between January 6th and the 12th? Brother Eka thought hard. He searched his memory, but he couldn't recall anything of significance happening in that week. It seemed utterly ordinary. The prophet then explained the spiritual reality to him. He said, spiritually, the atmosphere for your year was set during that gateway period. You were not aware of it, but an atmosphere of leakage was established around you, and that atmosphere has followed you all year long. The problems he faced in June and December were not random. They were the harvest of what was sown in January. To see a change, Brother Eckhart had to pray specifically, with violence and intent, to break that established atmosphere and reset his spiritual footing. He did so. And the following year, he approached that January gateway with a completely different understanding. He prayed violently throughout the days of January 6th to the 12th. He was deliberate and forceful in his spiritual declarations. And his entire year transformed. The leakage stopped. Contracts held. Opportunities solidified. This is the power of understanding and acting during this gateway. And he was not an isolated case. I remember a woman from Ibadan who completely ignored this critical week in 2017. During those 7 days, she found herself in constant, petty arguments with her husband. It was a tense, frustrating week in their home. She dismissed it as stress from the holidays, just a rough patch. But that argumentative atmosphere, that spirit of strife and discord that was allowed to flourish during the gateway, attached itself to their marriage. For the entire year that followed, that same atmosphere of tension and disagreement followed them. Every month brought new conflicts. It was only when they received counsel and prayed specifically to break that atmosphere, to cancel what had been said during that January window, that the cycle stopped. The pattern was broken because the root spiritual condition was addressed. These stories illustrate the absolute, non-negotiable importance of those 7 days. Your awareness or lack of it does not change the spiritual law. The gateway opens and an atmosphere is established. Your choice is whether it will be an atmosphere of life and blessing set by your intentional prayer, or an atmosphere of struggle set by default or by opposing spiritual forces. This is the first and foundational reason you must pay rapt attention to this time. Now I need to explain the second critical reason why this gateway is so important. It's because this is the specific time when demons receive their annual assignments. I want you to understand this clearly. In the kingdom of darkness, nothing is haphazard or random. Their operations are deeply strategic, meticulously timed, and they function with a terrible sense of order. Assignments are not given out every day on a whim. There is a schedule, a spiritual calendar they adhere to. And it is during this window, every January 6th, that demons are given their specific assignments for the common G year. Mandates that are designed to last all the way until December 31st. They receive their orders, their targets, and their objectives for the next 12 months. This is why the spiritual activity is so intense during this period. Forces are being mobilized and deployed. Let me make this real for you with another example from my past. There was a young woman who lived in Port Harcourt, and her name was Sister Nogoy. She was, by all accounts, a good and faithful person. She was prayerful. She was blessed in many ways, and her life was generally thriving. But during that crucial January 6th to 12th period in 2016, she let her spiritual guard down. She became what I would call spiritually lazy. The fervor of the new year had perhaps faded, and she didn't engage in intentional prayer. She didn't fast. She didn't seek God with any particular focus or intensity during those 7 days. She was unaware that she was in the most strategic week of the year. Because of her unawareness and her spiritual passivity during that time, I was assigned to her. My instructions came during that gateway week. My assignment was to plant specific debilitating spirits in her life, and I did so methodically, day by day. On January 6th, I planted the spirit of delay. On January 7th, I planted the spirit of confusion. On January 8th, it was a spirit of disappointment. On January 9th, a spirit of loneliness. On January 10th, a spirit of fear. On January 11th, a spirit of doubt. And on January 12th, I sealed and activated the entire assignment. This was the annual package, so to speak, that was now legally permitted to operate in her life, because the gateway was not contested. For the entire year that followed, Sister Nugoy's life was a struggle against these very things. She faced constant delay in every project and promise. She lived in a fog of confusion, unable to make clear decisions. Disappointment met her at every turn. She felt profound loneliness even in a crowd. Fear gripped her heart without reason, and doubt undermined her faith at every step. She continued to pray occasionally, she went to church, but nothing fundamentally changed, nothing shifted. Her prayers seemed to hit a ceiling because the annual assignment was already firmly in place, operating under the authority granted during that uncontested gateway. It was only at the very end of that year, during a December revival service, that a prophet had a word for her. He revealed that the root of her entire year's struggle was set during that specific January 6th to 12th period. Her year was spiritually programmed in that window. She then had to pray with great violence and specificity to cancel that annual assignment, to revoke the spiritual mandate given to those demons. She did so. And the following year, understanding this truth, she prayed strategically and fervently throughout that same gateway week. Her experience in 2017 was completely different, marked by clarity, progress, and peace. I also knew of a pastor in Kano who neglected this principle in 2018. He did not engage in any special prayer or spiritual covering for his church during that January gateway. As a result, demons were assigned to his congregation during that time, and their assignment was to cause division. All year long, that church was plagued by strife, arguments among leaders, and a spirit of disunity that hindered every good work. It took intentional warfare prayers later to break that assigned spirit of division. The pattern is consistent. Passivity during the gateway allows for the establishment of negative annual assignments. This leads me directly into the third reason this period is so vital. The January 6th to 12th gateway determines patterns. It establishes cyclical rhythms that will repeat throughout your year. Think of it like setting a template or a mold during those 7 days. Whatever happens to you spiritually, emotionally, or even circumstantially during that week tends to become a pattern. It repeats itself on a monthly cycle for the rest of the year. If you experience a sudden breakthrough, a surprising provision, or a profound peace during that gateway, you are likely to see patterns of breakthrough, provision, and peace recurring in the months ahead. Conversely, if you experience intense problems, sudden attacks, or recurring frustrations during that week, you have in effect set a template for those problems to revisit you month after month. The Gateway Week imprints a pattern onto the year. I saw this with a man from Benin City named Brother Olu. During the January 6 to 12 period in 2019, he hit a patch of unexpected financial trouble. Some bills came due that he hadn't anticipated. An emergency expense arose out of nowhere. For that entire week, he felt stressed, anxious, and worried about money. He shrugged it off, thinking it was just a bit of bad luck at the start of the year, a minor setback. But then something strange began to happen. Starting in February and then every single month after that, around the same dates, a financial emergency would repeat. On February 8th, his car broke down unexpectedly, requiring a major repair. On March 10th, a medical emergency arose with a family member, bringing new bills. On April 7th, something in his house needed urgent and costly fixing. Month after month, like clockwork, a financially stressful event occurred. He couldn't understand it. It felt like a curse. He was a good man, but he was trapped in a cycle. Finally, he sought spiritual help, and a prophet revealed the connection. The prophet told him plainly that what he experienced during the January 6th to 12th gateway had set a pattern. That pattern of financial pressure had been established as a monthly cycle for his year. Brother Olu then prayed with focus, not just about the immediate bills, but to break that specific cyclical pattern that was rooted in the January gateway. Once he did that, the monthly cycle of emergencies stopped immediately. In a similar way, a woman in Kaduna suffered from a constant sickness during that same gateway week in 2020. She was ill and weak for those entire 7 days. That sickness did not just go away, it established a pattern. For the rest of that year, every month she would fall sick with similar symptoms, her health failing at regular intervals. It became a debilitating cycle that only broke when she engaged in warfare prayers, specifically targeting the pattern that was set in that January gateway. Your experience during these 7 days is not an isolated event. It is a seed that, if left unaddressed, will produce a repetitive harvest. This is why your intentional spiritual activity during this time is not just about getting through a week. It is about programming the repetitive rhythms of your next 12 months for victory, not for struggle. Let me move on to the fourth reason this gateway demands your full attention. It is because this week is the decisive time when spiritual doorways either open or close for the entire year. I'm talking about those doors of opportunity, those doors of favor, doors that lead to breakthrough, promotion, and blessing. In the spiritual realm, there are accesses and entry points to different seasons and provisions in your life. The state of those doors, whether they are swung wide open, shut tight, or perhaps just cracked, during the period of January 6th to the 12th will determine their state for the full 12 months that follow. If they are open during this gateway, they tend to stay open, granting you access throughout the year. If they are allowed to remain closed or get shut during this time, you will find yourself pushing against locked doors for month after month, no matter how hard you knock later on. I remember a specific case that illustrates this painfully well. There was a job seeker in Enugu named Sister Ada. She had been struggling with unemployment for 2 long years. When January of 2021 arrived, she was hopeful, like anyone would be. She prayed a prayer on New Year's Day, asking God for a job. But then, from January 2nd through the 5th, she got busy with family visits and social gatherings, the normal activities after the celebrations. Her spiritual focus faded amidst the busyness. Then January 6th came, the gateway opened, but she was spiritually and physically tired. She didn't pray at all during that entire pivotal week. She didn't realize that this was the very week when spiritual doors concerning her destiny, like you have never prayed in these 6 years. That gateway has the power to unlock what 6 years of regular prayer could not unlock. They took this word to heart. During those 7 days, they entered into a new level of spiritual intensity. They prayed violently, with tears and authority. They fasted. They made bold declarations over her womb. They worshipped with a sense of divine timing. They prayed on the high tide. In March of 2022, just a couple of months later, the wife conceived. And in December of that same year, they held their baby in their arms. The prayers of that January gateway accomplished in a concentrated period what years of generalized prayer had not been able to achieve. It was the key that turned the lock. Another woman from Akure had been battling a stubborn chronic sickness for years. Medical help provided little relief. In January of 2023, she heard about this gateway principle. She decided to pray during January 6th to the 12th with what she called an unusual intensity, a focused desperation she hadn't tapped into before. She prayed on the high tide. By the time February came, the sickness had completely left her body. It was gone. These are not coincidences, they are demonstrations of a spiritual principle. When you pray in alignment with God's appointed times, your prayer is amplified. It carries the momentum of the season itself. This gateway week is one of those supreme, appointed times for amplification. To pray with ordinary effort during this week is to miss a tremendous advantage. To pray with extraordinary focus during this week is to see extraordinary results that can define your entire year. This is why the instruction is not just to pray, but to pray violently, to pray with everything you have, because the spiritual conditions are uniquely favorable for your faith to move the greatest mountains in your life. Now we come to the sixth reason, and it is a sobering one. Missing this gateway, failing to establish your spiritual authority during these 7 days, essentially means You are choosing to fight defensive battles all year long. It's a principle of spiritual territory. If you do not move in to establish dominance, to plant your flag of faith and authority during this open season, then opposing spiritual forces will. They will take advantage of the uncontested access. And once they establish that dominance, once they get a legal footing during this gateway, every single month that follows becomes an uphill battle. You will find yourself constantly on the defensive, trying to reclaim ground that should never have been lost, fighting to remove invaders who walked in through a door you left unguarded. You spend your year in reactive mode, putting out fires, instead of walking in the proactive victory that was available to you. I recall a pastor in ABA whose ministry was growing and had good momentum. In January of 2020, he was intensely busy with church programs and services from the 1st through the 5th, which is common. But when the calendar turned to January 6th, the start of the spiritual gateway, he was utterly exhausted. He saw it as a time to physically rest, not understanding it was the time for his greatest spiritual activity. He didn't pray with any special intensity during that January 6th to 12th period. He left the spiritual gate of his ministry unguarded and wide open. Demons, operating on their annual assignment cycle, took immediate advantage of that open gateway. They were assigned to his church during that week, and their specific mandate was to plant seeds of division and discord. From February onward, the harvest of those seeds began to appear. Every month brought a new, painful conflict. Faithful members began to leave for unclear reasons. Leaders within the church started complaining and arguing amongst themselves. A spirit of gossip and mistrust spread through the congregation. The pastor fought spiritually all year, calling for fast and prayer meetings, but he couldn't understand why the battles were so incessant and intense, why peace was so elusive. It was during a personal prayer retreat in December that God revealed the route to him. The revelation was clear. You left the gate open in January. You were not on guard during the time of establishment. Demons walked in freely and settled in your house. Now you are exhausting yourself fighting to evict them, when you could have simply prevented their entry in the first place. The pastor wept when he understood this. He then prayed prayers of cleansing and revocation over his ministry. But the most important change came the next year. In 2021, he shut down all regular church activities during the January 6th to 12th gateway. He declared it a mandatory week of prayer and fasting for all his leadership and any dedicated members. They gathered not for services but for warfare. They established dominance during the gateway, and that year, 2021, became the most peaceful, unified, and fruitful year his church had ever experienced. The battles diminished because the territory was secured at the right time. I also knew a family in Wari who neglected this principle in 2020. They didn't pray together or individually during that gateway week. That entire year, like clockwork, every month delivered a fresh crisis. One month it was severe arguments, the next a sudden sickness, the next an unexpected financial problem. They lived in a cycle of anxiety, moving from one emergency to the next. The pattern only broke when they received teaching on this gateway and prayed specifically to close the spiritual access point that demons had been using all year to launch their monthly attacks. Finally, the seventh reason this is all so critical is because this gateway isn't some man-made idea. It is biblical, and it is a reflection of God's strategic order. Our God is a God of seasons. Into a new gateway, cancel them forcefully. Fifth, address spiritual doors. Pray to close every door that the enemy has opened in your life, doors of access for sin, addiction, or failure. Then pray fervently to open every door of opportunity, favor, and blessing that God has ordained for you. Sixth, fill this week with worship. Worship is the most powerful atmosphere shifter. It invites God's presence and establishes His kingdom rule around you. Seventh, sow a special financial offering during this week as a faith seed for the entire year's harvest, planting into the fertile soil of this appointed time. After my own deliverance in 2022, in a church right there in Lagos, I came to understand that God gives his believers strategic weapons and insights. This knowledge of the January 6 to 12 spiritual gateway is one of those powerful weapons. Those who possess this knowledge and act on it decisively are positioned to dominate their year, to walk in proactive victory. Those who remain ignorant of it or ignore it often find themselves in a perpetual state of spiritual struggle, fighting battles that could have been prevented. Let us pray now. Father, in the mighty name of Jesus Christ, I thank you for revealing the truth of the January 6 to 12 spiritual gateway. Right now, today, I recognize that I am inside this powerful window of time. I refuse to waste it. I declare that the atmosphere over my year is one of breakthrough, not bondage. I declare that the assignment over my life this year is favor, not failure. I declare that the pattern of my year is increase, not decrease. I declare that every door you have destined for me is swung wide open, and every door the enemy opened is shut and sealed forever. Father, I break now, by the authority of Jesus, every negative atmosphere from the past that seeks to extend into this new year. I cancel every demonic assignment that was distributed during this gateway period against me and my household. I reverse every pattern of struggle and establish new patterns of victory and grace. Holy Spirit, I invite you to dominate my January 6 to 12. Let my prayers during these 7 days set the course for my entire year to be on fire for your glory. I declare Psalm 65:11, you crown the year with your bounty. I declare Isaiah 60:22, the least will become 1,000. I declare Joel 2:25, you will restore the years. From this moment until January 12th, I commit to praying, fasting, declaring, and establishing my year in the mighty and victorious name of Jesus. Amen. If you are hearing this during the January 6th to 12th period, do not let another hour slip by in passivity. Pray right now. If you are hearing this after January 12th, do not be discouraged. Pray with the authority of this revelation to reset and reclaim your year. Share this truth with someone who needs to hear it. This gateway is open. You must use it.